How did you get on? Well, it's important to explain what a category or an impairment group is. Okay, so first and foremost, we've got blind or visually impaired. Second, deaf or hard of hearing. Then some of you may have said that mobility issues or those with physical impairments, that can all come under physical. Then there's learning. We've got learning disability, issues with concentrating or remembering. And one that captures many different forms of disabilities is the ASD. Okay, so social or behavioural issues such as autism, attention deficit, Asperger's syndrome also. Another impairment group is that of mental health, and this is something that's really come onto the agenda for community football trusts over the last few years with the breakthrough of walking football, which we will explore in a future session. In this category, people with stamina or shortness, issues with stamina, shortness of breath, difficulty speaking or making yourself understood, long-term pain, discomfort that is always present or frequently recurs and affects people in some or other way. So we've looked at a comparison of a limiting disability and a non-limiting disability. Now we're going to draw some comparisons between disabled and non-disabled people. Once again, the statistics on this next slide and in further slides are from past active people survey. Why? Why have I done that? Well, I don't want to provide you with all the answers in preparation for your essay. I'd like you to go in, dig into the active people survey and find out the information for yourself. But when you do that, then you might find this type of information, and I wouldn't imagine the trends would have changed dramatically over the last 4 years or 5 years. So the top line there is non-disabled people and the navy blue line is disabled people. So looking back over the past, since the active people survey started in 2005 through to 2013, there's been a steady increase in disabled people taking part in sport from 15.1% through to 18.5%. Why is this? Well, it might be down to various sports profiling their membership and identifying that this is a target area to address and therefore providing bespoke provision for impairment groups. On this next slide, it looks at individual impairment groups, and the asterisk indicates a significant change from the Active People Survey 5 in 2010 and 2011. So people with a visual impairment have shown a significant decrease from 12.9% in Active People Survey 5 to 11.3%. And people with a physical impairment have shown a significant increase, up to 17.9% from 17.2%. Okay, again, don't get bogged down by the statistics. Think about why that might be. Looking at some of the other statistics, so those with social issues, more like of disabled people taking part in sport the most. Mental health, 16%. Other, 18.1%. Okay, so we're starting to get a bit of a trend here. Those with hearing impairments, out of all the impairments, are least likely to take part in sport. The next slide looks at no participation, with the navy blue line being disabled people and the yellow line being non-disabled people. So what can you see when looking at this graph? Well, it makes for positive reading, doesn't it? Because in 2005, 76.0% of disabled people undertook no sport participation whatsoever in the last month. When asked the same question in 2013, that figure has dropped by nearly 5% to 71.1%. Breaking that statistic down by impairment group, any intensity, any duration in the last month, we can see that visual impairment and hearing impairment are those with the highest percentages, which means they are the least likely to take part in sport. And then with social issues, 69.2%, they're the most likely to take part in sport. Remember, this is no sport participation rather than those that do participate. So what are the issues around collecting some of this data? Well, it's difficult to agree on the definitions of impairment and disability. So remembering how we defined it earlier, it's difficult to estimate casual participation. Every national governing body struggles to retrieve information on accurate data of those taking part in their sport, and disability sport organisations are no different. And the collection of data will require the labelling of people which may enhance the social stigma. You may have a disability which you don't think has an impairment, or you may not wish to disclose that disability because it doesn't negate you from taking part in sport in mainstream activity. However, organisations, when collecting this information, would need to know that labelling or understand that you did fall into that category to ensure that they could record that as within this data. So we've talked about the quantitative, so the statistics, so how many take part and how many don't take part. Now let's look at the qualitative. So for non-disabled people, their main reason, or the majority of people are saying, 29.6% are saying that it's because of a lack of time due to work. Whereas disabled people, around about the same percentage, are saying it's because of recent injury, illness, operations or medical reasons. It's a real difference there in the reasons for not taking part in sport. Looking at the second reason, again, it's health related for disabled people. Thirdly, it's increasing age. And then you're starting to see the lack of time. And then the final one is using their disability as a key reason for not doing sport. So there's a real differentiation between the two reasons of why people don't take part in sport, both non-disabled and disabled. Here we look at latent demand. So latent demand means I would like to do more sport, or I'd like to take part in more activity. Breaks it down by impairment group once again. The black diamond there on the screen identifies where on the chart all disabled comes, which is 50.2%, which is about an average of all impairments. So against that average, 60.5% of ASD is the highest there. So they'd like to take part in more sport. Let's look at the other end of the scale, and it's deaf or hard of hearing, which is 41.0%, which falls in line with the other statistics that we've had throughout this session so far, which is the group that is least likely to take part in sport and has the least amount of participants taking part in sport. So we're going to take a bit of a snapshot in Wales and how this group, disabled people in sport, is supported to get active. Well, in Wales, no specific national targets for disability sport. They're not reflected in the Climb and Higher strategic plan, which is the overarching 20-year plan for sport within Wales. Is this a good or a bad thing? Well, it can be a good thing, because if you've got no targets, then you can't really say whether or not you've achieved or you haven't achieved. So it is a bad thing, because if you've done extremely well, then you've got nothing to benchmark against. The organisation responsible in Wales for supporting smaller national governing bodies and increasing the awareness around sport within disabled groups is Disability Sport Wales. I've got this short YouTube clip to bring it to life rather than me talking about it. Enjoy.